Welcome to Study Loop.
For this question, we're being asked to note our understanding of scientific models and how they are applied in a real-world scenario in the ecological field. And if you look at our answer choices, we're only given two options here: analytic and simulation. And so before we even start to think about what the real-world scenario is, let's establish the definitions of these terms so we can go ahead and eliminate some of the answer choices that define them incorrectly. First up, we have the analytic model. There are some key terms to keep in mind to associate in your head with analytic models. They are mathematically complex and also linear in terms of the types of things that they describe. So an analytic model might be used to model a more simple or zoomed in thing happening in an ecological system. They tend to, as you can see here, follow a certain set path. They are very efficient. They are simplistic in terms of how obviously most things in the real world, due to outside factors that aren't counted in this linear system, might affect these figures, but overall they are typically used for more simple or easy to understand concepts in the real world. Now, when we need to take a look at more broader or more complex systems that are interacting with each other in a way that analytic models just can't model anymore, then we often turn to simulation models. These are all-encompassing. They have many different components where they might incorporate several different analytic models or the things that analytic models model in order to understand, say, the processes in an entire marine ecosystem all at once, every single component. These models tend to be also called computational models, and their results often are more realistic than an analytic model. At the same time, though, their results are so complex that sometimes it's easier to just do an analytic model if you're only looking at one portion of what's happening in an ecosystem. Now that we have those definitions laid out, I think we can go ahead and discount options B and C, because if you take a look at how they actually define what a simulation model and what an analytic model are, they are false. They go against what these definitions say they do. So that leaves us with A and D. Now that we've narrowed it down to those two options, let's take a closer look at our scenario to see how we might go about figuring out which model is correct. So in this case, in the question, we are told that we are looking at a desert food chain. I have here a very simple example of a primary producer, some sort of shrub, and then a herbivore of some kind, and then a carnivore. We have our primary producer, primary consumer, and secondary consumer right here. Again, this is very simplistic, but this is sort of what we're just thinking about for right now. And if we were wanting to model the dynamics happening here, say we wanted to calculate, what would happen if we changed the number of shrubs in this one region, or what's going to happen, say 5 or 10 years in the future in this food chain, we will use a model to do that. And now let's think back to the two types that we have. Now, it's true that food chains are complex. Typically, they're more complex than the image I have here, but they are complex in a certain way. But they are, at the same time, relatively straightforward. There are a lot of studies done on them. They are only looking at, the chain of who is eating who and what is getting eaten by whom. It's not incorporating any external environmental issues. Also, if we're just looking at a food chain and not a food web, we'll be looking at something a bit more simplistic than the entire eating environment of this desert area. So already we're off to a simple linear problem that we want to model. And maybe if we were looking at the desert ecosystem that this food chain is within as a whole, then we might want to use something like a simulation model, because then we would be taking in every single thing that's going on in this ecosystem. But since we're not doing that, we're only looking at this one linear circumstance in this ecosystem, then it might be best to use the analytic model, because we're, again, only looking at that one option. And because, yes, these relationships are mathematically complex in terms of having to consider biomass and energy expenditure and population size and population growth, those are all things that can be handled quite easily by an analytic model. And so that leaves us with A as our correct